light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. With me today on the show, I have my friend Sally Vanderford, and I don't have a lot of technical knowledge about it, so I'm hoping you can help with some definitions and such. What we wanted to discuss today was schizophrenia.
Just as you cannot give a clinical description of it, neither can I.
Okay.
What I can give you is a working relationship with it.
Okay.
I worked with people with schizophrenia who were, things had gone, they were having a meltdown, let's say.
Okay.
One of our officers, when I was working as a 911 dispatcher, that's my experience with this.
Okay.
One of our officers was killed by a schizophrenic who grabbed his gun and shot him with it. That made us, schizophrenia, we would really be nervous about sending officers to those calls.
Well, especially after that incident.
Especially after that incident. And there were things that schizophrenics would say where you could identify them immediately as a schizophrenic. They would say, there are waves coming out of my TV reading my mind.
Okay.
There are, and then they'd start talking about the alphabet police. The DEA, the FBI, and the CIA are all after me.
Oh,
and
okay.
these are just...
General paranoia.
This is general paranoia, and they seem to all come up with the same thing. They'd be talking about something that seemed totally normal, and suddenly they'd go off on, and my husband is flying over us, he's the king of Iran, and you're going, oh. Uh-oh.
So it's also no continuity of thought.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Where this gets a little challenging for me, I suppose, is over the years having met a number of people who claim to have various clairvoyant gifts. To me, it's something that can be neither proven nor disproven, but they did not demonstrate the lack of continuity in thought that you mentioned. I suppose because of my graduate school experiences, I try to deconstruct whatever it is and figure out, is this logical? Well, if that's happening, then this would be. And, if there are radio waves coming from your television, well, a radio wave is a measurable sort of thing. You adjust to a certain frequency and anybody could pick it up, not just you. So either it's not a radio wave or it's something telepathic or, but it begins to pull apart the description.
Now,
If what you're dealing with, we were talking the other day, and you said if what you're dealing with is the true schizophrenic, however, this sort of deconstructive conversation isn't going to last more than 2 sentences. Because if you're dealing with a metaphysical person, they will have the conversation. And we'll both agree, these are things that can be neither proven nor disproven, but this is what I'm perceiving. If you're dealing with a schizophrenic, it'll jump from one thing to the next.
that schizophrenic's reality is
Is
totally
not
different
stable.
from mine. It's not stable. They say things that couldn't be true. Or they'll say things, we used to have a gentleman that called up every night
Okay.
and said, there's a bomb in the cereal aisle of the Safeway. Click.
Okay.
Every night. Now,
That gives you a very difficult judgment call. I mean, on one hand, he could be calling up every night for attention, and there never is a bomb. And then one night it's for real. If he's trying to lull you into a false sense of security. And so that's why I say it's a difficult judgment call. If it's a schizophrenic calling up and saying that, probably it's not actually there. But if you don't know whether it's a schizophrenic or not, it becomes a really heavy judgment call to make.
They are very easy to recognize.
Okay.
Very easy to
What were the
recognize.
major warning flags to you?
Alphabet police and radio waves, every time.
If they say the FBI are after me.
The FBI, DEA, CIA, they're all after me.
Hmm.
I doubt that anybody who's got all those people after them is going to be calling 911 for help.
It would seem to me if they have that kind of paranoia, they would assume that 911 was in on it and calling 911 would tip them off. But, but again, that's the discontinuity, inconsistency of thought.
Schizophrenia, as I'm sure you know, hits males 5 times more than females.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Like, so there are many diseases that do that. Hemophilia is another one.
That is more predominant in men than women.
5 times more than women. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Going back to the case you mentioned, the schizophrenic who got the officer's gun and shot him, did anyone figure out what he was perceiving at the moment to elicit that?
He was in his own world.
He was in his own world,
and it's
but
not a world that we can visit.
it's not a world we can visit. It's a world, is it always characterized by paranoia? Or nearly always?
Nearly always. Nearly
Okay.
always.
So if you've got someone who's not mentally connecting and no consistency of thought, and you interpret that strong paranoia is highly probable, those are the people you want to be really careful about keeping away from knives, guns, etc.
Well, definitely.
I mean, I'm just starting with the obvious.
Yes, and it also sets in around the ages of 19, 20, 21.
Okay. Frequently late teens then,
Late teens.
but almost no indications beforehand.
None.
The reason I guess I'm being so upfront with the questions is that I think people need to get comfortable talking about it at least.
Definitely.
Instead of saying schizophrenia and everybody goes and runs for the
We
door.
don't have that in our family,
Or
it was something that in years past, in Victorian times and past, you just hid the person.
I think everything that was not understood
Was hidden.
was hidden.
Yes.
Everything. Whether it was, there's-
Victoria had an autistic son named John. That nobody
Okay.
ever knew about. He was kept at Sandringham.
but of course at that time they had no test for autism like we do today.
No, but looking back on him now,
Well, it's the same way that they've done posthumous evaluations of Albert Einstein and determined that he was autistic.
yes.
I joked with someone once, having autism, as I do, is kind of like getting both ends and nothing in the middle. Because the middle is where all the lighthearted social stuff usually happens. So you get some deficiencies and some gifts, but all the social stuff where most of life plays out is a conundrum. For someone who has been a highly functioning individual up to age 19 and suddenly develops schizophrenia, though, I would think the paranoia is almost understandable because it would seem like it might be a terrifying experience of losing control of your own mind.
Oh, certainly. I know it'd be terrifying for me.
If that were to happen to one of my friends, I don't know what I could offer other than to say, I'll go with you, but we need to talk to someone.
About some lithium.
Well, lithium, I've heard all sorts of different reports
Sure.
and such, but
Sure, but I mean,
I don't think, I think it's not advisable for the average person or the minister or the good friend or whomever to get into second guessing
oh, certainly not.
what is
and I was
what is
joking.
the realm of psychiatrists and
Yeah.
clinical psychologists and people who have years of training in dealing with these complex problems. But to have a friend who is suddenly questioning the stability of his own mind, I would say, I'll go with you.
Definitely.
But we need to talk to someone and get more information
Definitely.
because we don't have enough information to address this.
That's exactly how you should handle it.
But not to be afraid of being there.
And if things have progressed far enough where there is possibly some violence involved,
Well, especially.
911
If
is the
violence
answer.
is not enough of a warning flag, I don't know what is. But it's, again, to me, it's about being willing to sit with a problem that you don't understand, you don't have an answer, but just being willing to be there and say, we're going to face this together. I don't know what the answer is, but I will help you look for it.
Having an advocate is a huge thing when it comes to medical.
Especially when there are people who want to step in and say, well, you can't make any decisions for yourself anymore. Let us run your life for you.
Yes.
I know a good Baptist minister who would say that about me being gay.
I'm sorry.
It's that kind of, I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm so strong about self-agency. You know, granted, there are times where your ability to be your own agent is compromised. Even in that moment, I would hope for a friend who will not take away the last shreds of self-agency I might have.
In the South, when you go into the hospital, you take a person with you. Called a
You do.
Called a sitter.
A sitter.
And they make sure that the nurse comes when she's supposed to, gives you the medication she's supposed to give you.
Seriously,
Seriously.
I have never heard of this.
Yes. And it could be your housekeeper, it could be your best friend, it could be your daughter.
Okay. They don't have to have any medical training.
None whatsoever. They're just there to advocate for you. Make sure that what's happening to you is what the doctor has
And they would
prescribed.
have, or you would sign something so they would have legal authority.
Nope. They're
Well,
just
I guess when you say advocate for you, I would want them to have the authority to stop the nurse and say, explain what you're doing. Or to ask the doctor, I need a copy of the schedule so that I know whether the nurse is doing it on schedule. I mean, it seems to me those would be medical information things where there would need to be some kind of signed release. You know,
I think more than that, what that sitter is doing is making sure that no harm comes to the patient.
but how would they know?
Well, without knowing that the person is supposed to get 10 milligrams instead of 100,
Mm-hmm.
they wouldn't. They're not a professional, but they're
Okay.
there just to make sure that basic things are happening.
Okay. But they don't get in, when you say advocacy, you're not talking about actually speaking for you to the doctors or anything. You're talking more about having a witness to everything that goes on so that no doctor or nurse can think that they are
That's part of it.
unobserved.
That's part of it.
Okay.
And the other part is getting the nurse in there when it's time to change whatever. When it's time to change the IV, when it's time to change the saline.
But the doctor would have to tell the sitter what those times are.
No, it would be written on a chart on the wall. There's a whiteboard on the wall.
Okay. So the person
says-
who's the sitter has to know how to read and interpret those charts.
The chart will say 6 o'clock, new IV bag.
Okay. And that's a practice throughout the South at least.
And it's not something I have found in other parts of the country,
Oh,
only in the South.
only in the South?
Yes.
Okay. Well, sounds like a good idea that should be spread around.
Couldn't hurt.
Going back to schizophrenia, though, it must
Yes.
be agonizing for the family to watch someone they have loved for 18 years
Oh,
suddenly turn into someone they don't know.
yes.
And that would also recommend family counseling.
I would hope so. And
Does psychological counseling still have the stigma that it did in the past?
I don't know if the psychological counseling helps at all with schizophrenia.
No, in terms of helping the family deal with the person,
Oh, definitely.
you know, if it still has a stigma, I can see where there might be families who would want to keep it secret and
there
quiet
are.
and not talk about it.
There are.
No, we don't want family counseling. And I'm saying these are trained professionals.
Right.
They can advise you in coping skills. They can advise you how to understand this person you thought you knew, who has now turned into someone else. they can help your family navigate the rough and confusing waters of this transition. Should I assume that people don't recover from schizophrenia?
I never heard of anybody recovering from it, no.
Okay. But it can be moderated with medication.
With medication.
Okay.
Usually lithium.
Usually lithium. Okay.
Yes.
I don't know enough about different pharmaceuticals.
And I don't either. I just happen to know that when I would ring down the hospitals to let them know they had a patient inbound, if it was a schizophrenic, they were always taking lithium.
Okay. Well, and if the medical profession shifts to a different answer at some point other than lithium, it would still be appropriate for whichever family member to talk to the doctor and ask, do we still use lithium for this, or is there something more recommendable? I mean, a lot of this is learning how to talk to medical professionals, which up until that time, there are a lot of American families that have very little to do with their medical professionals.
And there are medical professionals that are not doing their jobs the way they should.
Okay, that opens a whole nother tangent. What are you referring to when you say that?
I'm for the way I've been treated as a female
Okay.
by doctors. Yeah.
So there's possibilities of gender bias in... That means absolutely, right?
Absolutely.
I have made such a point of staying healthy as much as I can throughout my life, accepting responsibility for my physical, mental, and emotional health, and being proactive in whatever ways I can, that I have really not had extreme contact with the medical profession in any of these areas.
And I contracted breast cancer at the age of 29.
29, wow.
This was back before they had to give you your options.
So they decided what was going to happen to you without asking.
What was going to happen to me.
Ugh.
I would go for second opinions, and the first second opinion I got was, why don't you just do what your doctor is telling you to do? Another one was...
If you feel like your doctor might not be trustworthy, I think it's time to ask questions.
I was being told I was facing a bilateral mastectomy.
Good
I was
heavens.
29 years old. I wanted to know my options.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like to think that everybody should know all their options in each case, but part of that is understanding the growing pains of our medical profession, that in the United States you have to basically go looking, for example, if you want to find a doctor trained in homeopathy, instead of traditional pharmacology.
Yes.
Homeopathy is a whole, am I using the words right, naturopathic? Or more it's an entirely different approach, and of course if you go to Asia, then they employ acupuncture and all sorts of other alternative medical practices also.
I wanted you to hear some of the other things that doctors said to me.
Okay, I'm sorry for interrupting.
One doctor said to me, what's your problem, honey? You can wear falsies.
Oh dear.
Another one walked in and grabbed my hand and put something in it, and he said, there's nothing wrong with that, is there? I said, well, what is that? He said, that's a breast implant.
Not comprehensive explanations.
I finally found
go home, think about it, we'll talk again in a week.
I finally found a doctor who had gone to college with my father.
Okay.
And he was
much more compassionate.
Much more compassionate.
At some point, I would like to think they have to remember that they're still dealing with a human being, not a machine. This is not like replacing the oil pump in your car. This is a human being, and there is something about having parts removed and artificial parts added that has the potential of making one feel less human. Mm-hmm. And yes. In a true objective sense, you are less human.
Yes.
Is it good or bad? Well, it depends on how you prepare yourself mentally and emotionally for that transition.
And how basically strong are you?
Okay. I find that a bit vague, I guess, because of course, most of us don't know how strong we are until we have to face it.
That's right.
And sometimes we think we can't and we do, but then other times we think we can and we fail. I don't know that failing should ever be considered a penalty. It's simply it's an event. It's not
how we learn.
It can be how we learn. I don't really learn by failure. But
By mistakes?
I don't.
No.
If you allow me to make a mistake, I will remember how to do the mistake exactly. And that's all I will know. If you show me how to do it right the first time, that's the way I will always do it. But if you let me make a mistake first, I will then have to unlearn the mistake before I can learn the correct procedure. So
And
please don't let me go down that path.
Celebrate my mistakes.
My brain gets hooked on them too much because I remember exactly what happened. I remember how it did it. It's like the more times, it's like establishing a bad habit and then having to establish a good habit. Because of the way my brain works, if I do it once and it's wrong, that's the first way I'm going to tend to do it next time. Instead of modifying the process. I mean, that's a kind of duplicity, really, because I would have to imagine doing it differently than I did it. And so I've got two different understandings.
And what you're describing right now is how women drive. If you teach me how to get somewhere,
Okay.
and then you say, but you can get there a lot easier if you go, I'm going to go the way you taught me to go there, that I've
So
gone
show me
before.
right the first time.
Show me right, yeah.
And then I'll remember doing it right. But if you allow me to do it wrong, I'll remember how to do it wrong. Interesting that you make that correlation. Somewhere at the beginning of this, though, we were talking
about schizophrenia, weren't we?
Yeah, and where the brain is somehow becoming disconnected from itself. And it's alarming and it's frightening, but it's not unmanageable if you do it as a family with a personal support group with a competent professional. It's not a death sentence.
It won't necessarily go wrong.
It won't necessarily go wrong. It won't be the last good thing that ever happens in your life. I mean, it's not like your life is over. I don't think schizophrenia should be viewed as, forgive me if it's too blunt to say it, a justification for suicide.
I don't know that schizophrenia and suicide really go together.
Well, if someone
I would have to
realized
look
they were
into that.
developing schizophrenia and they didn't want to go down that path,
Yes, I understand. Yeah.
you know, like cancer or
Right.
in stage 4 cancer or something,
Right.
or somebody facing Alzheimer's, you know, that there are ways to manage it that may or may not be acceptable to you. Don't immediately assume that your life is over. I need to end it before I get worse. But it does very much, I think in a way, it drives us toward rediscovering each other. Because you're going to need people to deal with it. You're going to need a personal support system.
If
You're gonna need
don't
competent
get that
professionals.
personal support system, you end up out in the woods like Ted Kaczynski,
Okay? Which, for anyone who hasn't heard that name,
the Unabomber,
a person with paranoia and violent tendencies.
who is not interacting with society in a positive way, is interacting in a very negative way by sending bombs out. He's not getting the support that he needs.
I haven't actually heard anyone say it. I'm just for the sake of conversation or debating the issue. If someone were to say, well, he's off in the woods, but at least he's happy. If we just leave him alone, he can live out his days there. But I don't know if that's a compassionate human response.
That's a good question.
You know, if they're
Is
happy
he
in their
happy
own
out
little, if they're happy in their own little world, do we just leave them there as long as they're happy? I'm not sure. I guess the thing I would point out at that point is that on their own, they're not able to escape from that world. And even that world is not always perfect. and
Oh,
they will be alone in that world. And so that's where, to me, it comes back to saying, we need to stand together, we need to rediscover each other, we need to love each other enough to look for the answers that we don't have. Thank you for
Yes.
having this
Yes.
wonderful, complex, challenging, but hopefully inspiring conversation.
You're
we
welcome.
we
Thank
don't know
you.
it all, but there's reason for hope.